Hello and welcome to VideoGirls.com. I'm your host Tamashi. The holiday season may be over now, but winter still has a long way to go, and it won't be getting any warmer here for a few more months. I wish that meant I could enjoy some snow, but unfortunately I live in a part of the US that's not quite wet or cold enough for snow to fall, and I have all my life. Because of this, I tended to play a lot of snowboarding video games as a kid, so I could imagine what it would be like to actually get outside and play in the snow. Luckily for me, I grew up in the late 90s and early 2000s, and around that time the snowboarding genre really boomed. There was a snowboarding video game for every home console at the time, and I was lucky enough to own several of these. Before we take a look at some of the games themselves though, it should be noted that it takes a lot of skill and effort to make a snowboarding game engaging. After all, a slope covered in snow doesn't exactly lend itself to eye-catching visuals, and since most snowboarding occurs on such slopes and gravity does a lot of the work, there isn't much interaction required from the player to make the character move. This is why until Cool Boarders was released in 1996 for the PlayStation, the genre wasn't terribly popular. In order to work around the aforementioned obstacles, Cool Boarders' main appeal was on pulling off tricks and earning points for them, rather than racing. Though the game sold decently and attracted new players to the genre, it was criticized for its lack of content, having only 3 courses to choose from. This is where 1080 snowboarding for the N64 comes in. Released in 1998, 1080 snowboarding took advantage of Cool Boarders' success and greatly surpassed it. With 3 times as many courses as its predecessor, 5 characters to choose from, and over 25 different tricks to pull off, it was overflowing with content when compared to the competition. Rather than focusing the gameplay on stunts, however, it took on the task of creating an innovative racing mode by furnishing each course with distinctive characteristics, including different terrains, weather conditions, bridges, cabins, and icy caverns, all of which were not only attractive to look at, but also impacted the gameplay. 1080 managed to break the genre's status quo by overcoming the visual handicaps that come with the setting, as well as finding ways to innovate how the game itself is played, like giving each character unique strengths and weaknesses, each 4 different stats, and giving the game some of the most complicated controls I've ever had to navigate. This is both a blessing and a curse, because the complexity adds realism to the game. I mean, you wouldn't be able to just hop on a board in real life and take off down the slope without knowing what you're doing. And again, it keeps the game from becoming boring. On the other hand though, sports games are generally most fun with other human players, and such difficult to understand controls are likely to scare off more casual gamers. Since the majority of all gamers fall into this category, finding 3 other people who are willing to devote the time to learn the controls is rather problematic. Games with a focus on local multiplayer work best when the controls are simple and easy to understand. I wouldn't say 1080's controls are impossible to learn, but this isn't the kind of game you can just play and figure out as you go. In order not to crash on every little bump on the course, you'll need to hold the Z button and use the joystick to position the board under the character so that it's completely parallel to the snow. Until you learn how to do this, finishing any race at all is impossible, because every time you crash you lose some health, and since the courses aren't completely flat, you're going to crash every time you find uneven snow. Mastering the controls is absolutely imperative in single-player mode as well, because the opponent AI is relentlessly difficult, and keeping up with them even once you know what you're doing is challenging. Still, 1080 snowboarding revolutionized the genre, and started quite a fad. After the release of Cool Boarders in 1080, over 45 different snowboarding games were released through the early 2000s. The genre absolutely exploded, and the success of 1080 snowboarding paved the way for other companies to tackle the slopes with their own snowboarding titles. It also earned a release on Virtual Console on its 10th anniversary, downloadable for 1,000 Wii points. One of the many games to jump on the snowboarding bandwagon was A1 Games' Snowboarding for the PlayStation. When it came down to choosing between this game and Cool Boarders as a kid, I picked Snowboarding, because I thought it must be the definitive snowboarding game with a name like that. Wouldn't you be curious about a game like this? A generic cover and a generic name, with no real hint about what the gameplay is like aside from the sport it's based on? I know I was. Unfortunately though, it's games like this that cause the snowboarding genre to be so neglected in the first place. I must have been one of the only kids in the country that even gave this game a chance, because it's so obscure it doesn't even have its own Wikipedia page, and no one online has ever reviewed it to my knowledge. If you were ever wondering how not to make a snowboarding game, this would be the perfect example. It seems like the developers had a few goals in mind. First, they wanted to have more content than 1080 snowboarding, boasting a whopping 27 different courses compared to 1080's 9. Second, they wanted to outperform 1080 in the area it was most criticized, its difficulty. Sounds great, right? Well, the problem isn't in the game's ambition, it's in its lazy execution. While on the course selection screen there are 27 different courses to be unlocked, if you look at the map preview of each course, They're the exact same 2 courses, only they repeat over and over again 27 times. If it wasn't bad enough that the game outright lies to you about how much content it delivers, the 2 different courses themselves are nearly exactly the same, the only difference being how they end. Not that you'd be able to tell if they were any different, because they didn't even attempt to make their 2 sorry excuses for courses visually exceptional. You know how I mentioned before that it takes effort to make a snowboarding game interesting because snowy slopes are just entirely white? Well, this game takes no steps to counteract that, and you look at an almost entirely white screen the whole time you play. This is the absolute worst course design I have ever seen, bar none. And believe it or not, it gets worse when you look at their selection of characters. While 1080 had 5, each with unique designs, names, stats, and backgrounds, Snowboarding has 3 unique models with different abilities and a recolor of each. And when I say recolor, I mean it in the worst connotation of the word possible. Not only is this game deceitful, bland, and lacking of any genuine effort, it's also incredibly racist. A1 Games is a Japanese company, and if you believe in normative moral relativism, which I'm not saying I do, this sort of thing is explicable because racial relations in Japan are very different than they are here, and racism against black people is more culturally acceptable there. However, even if you do believe in moral relativism, there's absolutely no excuse for this getting past their localization team. Regardless of your philosophy, it's extremely insulting that the people responsible for this game cared so little about their customers that they couldn't even be asked to remove something this offensive from their game before shipping it to a country where the racial group in question has a long and tragic history. So now that we're well aware of how half-assedly they accomplished their goal of providing more content, did A1 Games succeed in outshining 1080's difficult gameplay? Well, it's definitely easier than 1080, but not in a good way. There's absolutely no input required from the player to make the character move. They just slide down the mountain on their own. You can jump with X and make sharp turns with circle and square, but there aren't any places on either of the courses where such a thing would work to your advantage, at least in racing mode. Instead, whether or not you win depends entirely on which character you choose. As mentioned before, the 3 different characters each have a unique ability. One has better balance, one has better turning, and one has faster speed. Right off the bat, 2 of these are absolutely useless. You can't crash first of all, so there's no reason you would need balance at all. And since the courses are so straight and uninspired, you almost never need to turn. All you need to do is pick the character with speed, and that will give you the edge over your opponent. And even if you don't win, by even playing at all, you'll always get the high score for each course and unlock the next race. The AI doesn't even try. In fact, the default scores to beat for each course are all over 5 minutes long, which is impossible, because each course has a 3-minute time limit. This leads me to believe that even the people working on the game never actually played the finished product, and considering how void this game is of anything that resembles genuine effort, that wouldn't be surprising. Trick mode isn't any better. As opposed to 1080's 25 different tricks, each with unique button combinations required to pull them off, Snowboarding simply requires the player to jump when the game tells them to, and they automatically do whatever trick works best for that area. You can also just mash the X button the entire way down the slope, and easily rack up thousands of points by the time you reach the bottom. And if the game wasn't easy enough for you, you can turn on the course guide so it can point out how boring and lazy its course design is, with little flags that lead you to the bottom of the slope. You know, in case you think the goal is up your own butt or something and you can't figure out where to go. A1 Games was so close to doing anything that required even a small amount of effort that they didn't even attempt to compete with the other better snowboarding games out there. They tried to bluff with misleading statistics like their number of courses, but aside from stupid 7-year-old me, gamers were too smart to buy into it. Thus, snowboarding for the PlayStation faded into obscurity, and rightly so. I think we'll stop here. After all, if we took a look at every snowboarding game that was released back then, it'd be spring before we were through. But at least we saw the best of the best and the worst of the worst. And if you're looking to escape into a winter wonderland like I did, hopefully now you have a better idea of which games to try. I recommend getting 1080 Snowboarding for the Virtual Console, or trying one of the games in the Cool Border series, which are available for the PlayStation Store for about $6 each. But whatever you do, don't waste a penny on an uninspired mess like A1 Snowboarding. I'm Tamashi, and keep watching VideoGirls.com for more reviews. See ya!